Good afternoon. Last week I had the opportunity to travel to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq to speak with our diplomatic and military leaders in the region, together with the leaders of the countries of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq. With respect to Afghanistan, we're encouraged by the new leadership there. President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah are committed to strongly supporting the international effort. They have already taken serious steps to improve the efficiency of the Afghan security forces. They have also started looking seriously at internal governance in terms of the Kabul Bank example is one where they have, are moving to try to resolve that. And we have seen, and I've been traveling there since 2002, since January 2002, a significant transformation of the country and real progress. Particularly the status of women in that country, and many things that have changed fundamentally. And they are committed to continue this change. But we understand, and they understand, that this progress is fragile, requires constant effort, constant attention. The Taliban is still a very capable fighting force. It did not achieve its objectives last year, 2014. The objectives were to seize significant territory, particularly urban areas, and also to disrupt the elections. But because of the Afghan National Security Forces, there were effectively 2 elections conducted, a huge turnout. The results, both if you pool the votes for Dr. Ghani and Dr. Abdullah, it's about close to 90% of the population of Afghanistan expressed their confidence in the leadership of these 2 individuals. But still, the Taliban is a capable force. This fighting season coming up is going to be a very difficult one. In addition to the Taliban, there's also other elements like the Haqqani network, who operate principally from Pakistan, who have significant capabilities and have the intention still, I think, to disrupt the government of Afghanistan and their security forces. And they're particularly capable, the Haqqanis, of high-profile attacks in urban areas, particularly Kabul. So there are still challenges. The Afghan National Security Forces have made progress. Their operational forces, the basically ground forces, seem to be doing much, much better. We all recognize that they need additional support in terms of enablers, medevac, all those things which we are moving to correct. It'll take some time. I had an opportunity to fly with their Special Operations Wing with an Afghan pilot, so they're beginning to develop sophisticated expertise, in particularly these counterinsurgency special operations. In fact, our special operators were highly complementary of the Special Operations Forces that the Afghan National Security Establishment is able to deploy. The other thing, too, which is interesting and I think useful, is that they're beginning to collaborate at many different levels. Right now, the Afghan forces are conducting an operation in Helmand Province, and frankly, 5 or 6 years ago, the idea is that the Afghan forces would be fighting alone, independently, in the wintertime, and Helmand was not something you would assume. They are doing that, and they've also fused their intelligence operations so that they're both National Intelligence Service together with their police intelligence and their military intelligence all working together. And this represents, I think, progress, but again, it is something that we have to continue to help develop as we go forward. Once again, I do want to emphasize this new leadership in Afghanistan. It is a 180 degrees, both their attitude, their commitment, their engagement, all of that represents, I think, that's something very critical and something that we can collectively build upon. General Campbell, our commanding officer for resolute support, the new mission. He's one of our best military leaders. He believes he has the resources in place for 2015 to go forward, and then the issue really is building in more flexibility in 2016 and beyond. And there's serious discussions about building that flexibility. One aspect that we have to recognize is we have multiple missions in Afghanistan. One mission is to train, equip, and support Afghan national security forces. The other is a regional counterterrorism mission. And we have to make sure that we are disposed in such a way that we can conduct both these missions and we can do it effectively. And so I believe that this is something that's being reviewed very carefully at every level. And I just would emphasize that it's not just about training and equipping, it's also a longer-term counterterrorism capability in the region that could not only protect our forces, but preempt terrorist groups that are attempting to or may attempt to inflict damage beyond the borders of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and we have to be conscious of that. One of the interesting factors that occurred upon my arrival is we sat down in Pakistan with General Raheel, the Chief of Staff of the Pakistani Army, and he formally made it clear to the ambassador that they have brokered a negotiation between the government of Afghanistan and the Taliban. They made it very clear that they sort of laid the line down to the Taliban that they have to sit down with the Ghani government and they have to begin discussing reconciliation. There were attempts in the past, those attempts faltered. With the explicit, overt commitment of the government of Pakistan to help broker this, then the possibility, I think, is much stronger for at least the first meeting. And I think everyone goes into it with very, very limited expectations, but it is a positive development. And it's a positive development in the sense, too, of indicating what's going on in Pakistan. And the sense I had is that first the terrible, horrific attack on students in Peshawar has dramatically changed the outlook of the Pakistanis in terms of recognizing that all of these terrorist groups pose a threat to them, and one that they can't sort of segregate into the ones they cooperate with and the ones that they will fight against. So there's still a ways to go, but they're making real progress. They took the offensive into northwest Khorasan, significant military operations there, and General Raheel has indicated they're going to continue this effort. And they're going to focus, frankly, on this counterinsurgency operation in their country. As you know, in the past, there was always a priority, and the priority tilted towards protecting their border from the Indians. Now I think they're being very explicit about their number one national security challenge is the existence of these terrorist groups within Pakistan. The other issue, which was interesting, is even there, they are very much concerned with ISIL and ISIS. Their sense, I think, is that it doesn't pose an immediate threat, but their fear is that splinter groups from the Taliban or self-proclaimed terrorists will use the ISIL banner to begin to conduct operations, attempt to recruit, etc. But it was very interesting that, even in Pakistan and Afghanistan, the impact, because of the notoriety and the sudden rise of ISIL, has had an impact there. And I think that impact is once again, pointing out how these terrorist groups can't be sort of managed, that their whole essence is ultimately anti-government, anti-established authority, and I think and hope at least the Pakistanis are going to get out of the business of trying to manage it and get to the business of preempting it. Just one final point about the issue with respect to Pakistan and their activities. Because of their offensive in North Waziristan, they've actually driven a lot of terrorist operators into Afghanistan. that poses both a problem and, in some respects, an opportunity, because if they're there, they've been basically uprooted from their bases, their secure bases. They're on the move. They're much more vulnerable to Afghan national security forces and to cooperation with the United States in terms of tactical operations, particularly our ability to conduct airstrikes. But it does pose, on the other side, this increased number of very active and very capable terrorist operatives who have now been pushed out of Pakistan and into Afghanistan. So that is basically a sense of my visit to both those countries. In Iraq, we saw basically and had meetings with the new Prime Minister al-Abadi, who has taken some very positive steps forward. But what we sense is that the ISIS threat has basically pulled together all of the sectarian groups. They have a common enemy now, and there's a focus on that common enemy. And the Abadi government is trying to take steps to effectively deal with, on a collaborative way, with ISIS. They've reached out to the government in Kurdistan and in terms of finalizing an oil arrangement that was pending for years. They are already, Abadi has dismissed officers who he felt were not competent enough to lead Iraqi national security forces. They are trying to move legislation that would create National Guard units, both Sunni and Shia, so they could put some type of organizational structure behind some of these militias. And they're beginning to talk seriously about reforming de-Baathification laws that have been on the books since the invasion back in 2003, 2004. That is a step forward. There's a long way to go before they are able, I think, to fully have a truly integrated government. But the common threat has really got the attention of everyone there, and the common effort is clear against ISIS. But again, these sectarian tensions might be abating, but they're not going to go away. And ultimately, one of the challenges of the government is to be able to absorb these militias into formal security forces so they can be directed from Baghdad, not from other places, and to do so in a way that truly recognizes the Sunni population. Recruitment of Sunnis into these popular militia forces is critical. The bulk of the individuals coming into these new government sponsors, or at least government recognized militias, are Shia, and there has to be this balance. And also there has to be an attempt to reach out to the tribes, particularly in the Anbar Sunni tribes, to get them engaged, to get them supplied, to get them into the fight. Now, ISIS, as again, has crystallized efforts both by Peshmerga in the north, Kurdish forces, by Shia militias, and by the Iraqi National Security Forces. ISIS remains capable. Their momentum has been stopped. They have lost a bit of territory, but they're still capable of conducting operations and attacks, and they're doing that as today. Some of it is just to disrupt planned operations. Some of it are targets of opportunity, but they still are a very, very capable force. As we all know, the focal point of a lot of activity is Mosul. There are operations that have been underway now for weeks, if not months, to move down and put pressure on Mosul from the north, particularly the Kurds. The Kurds have also interdicted some of the transportation roads, lines of communication into Mosul. There's operations by principally Shia militias to move up and put pressure from the east and the south. And it is clear that the next major effort although I don't think anyone can predict the precise timing, will be against Mosul. That is going to be a very difficult operation. It's a city of over 1 million people. It will require close coordination, and in urban warfare, the defenders have, in many cases, much more significant advantage than the attackers because of narrow streets, buildings that can be booby-trapped. You can't use air strikes as effectively as you can in open country. You can't identify targets. You have to be much more sensitive to collateral damage. All of these factors are going to play out. But it seems clear that the next major effort, and it will be an effort principally by the Iraqi National Security Forces, will be directed against Mosul when the conditions are most favorable. And those conditions are, at this time, are trying to be developed on the ground. One other aspect I should point out, too, is, and this is not a surprise, is that in the wake of the pressure on Baghdad, the Shia militias became quite prominent, and also Iranian support became quite explicit. And that Iranian presence is still clear in the country in terms of cooperating with the Shia militia. And also, it was pointed out to us that, particularly the Quds Force derives material benefits from being in Iraq in terms of real dollars. They're able to be able to take money out of the country through activities. So there are incentives for an Iranian presence there, multiple incentives. Their fellow Shia, protecting shrines that are sacred to the Shia religion, financial opportunities, etc. But again, this whole issue still has to be reconciled. This is the fundamental dilemma of Iraq from the beginning of 2003, the invasion, of how do you ultimately put together a country that is multi-sectarian in a way that all the sects feel as if they are true participants, and that the country is not unduly influenced by regional forces. Finally, up in Kurdistan, we had a chance to meet with President Barzani and also the Deputy Prime Minister Talabani. The Kurds have been fighting with our help very well, effectively integrating our air power and their ground forces, and they're continuing to do that. They've also taken on a great many displaced persons into the region, and so they have a humanitarian problem as well as tactical military problems. And they are continuing to sort of put pressure on Mosul, but they also understand that at some point, to avoid exacerbating these sectarian tensions, they don't want to be too far into what is traditionally Sunni Arab territory. So there's not a formal sort of line, but informal places where they think they can be more effective and other places that are less effective.